Hi, I'm Devon Morse, and I'm here with Josh Culbreath, one of Norristown's most famous athletes. Thank you, Mr. Culbreath, for talking with me today. It's such an honor for me to sit down, well, for you to sit here with me today. Do you mind just explaining who you are and some of the achievements you have accomplished along the way?
I'll try, because it's been a long time. And I was born and reared in Norristown. I attended elementary schools. I went to three different ones. They had a problem with being overcrowded at one. I grew up in the east end of Norristown. My address was 725 Walnut Street.
Walnut Street.
And 713 was Tommy Lasorda. He was down the street from me, just doors from me. I went to Washington School, which was up on the hill there between Oak and Marshall. I went there in my first grade, and it got overcrowded, so they sent me 2 blocks down on what was an Erie and Walnut, which was Welsh School, which doesn't exist. It's a nuns facility now today, but I went there, and then I came back to Washington School in my second grade, supposedly, and then from there we moved to Smith Street, 822. So down the street from me was another great athlete. His name was Clarence Smith.
Clarence Smith.
His brother was the #1 progressive jazz organist in the world, Jimmy Smith. So in that neighborhood, there were quite a few people that we felt that was quite a thing to have Tommy Lasorda and me to do what I did in running, and Jimmy Smith as the #1 progressive jazz organist in the world. But that was it for schooling in elementary, and I went to Hancock, which was closer to where I was at the time, which is near the Carver Community Center. And a historical Ebenezer church was across the street. And I went there to 6th grade, and then I went on to Rittenhouse. We had 2 junior high schools, Rittenhouse and Stewart.
Right, Stewart.
And
I went to Stewart.
I went to Rittenhouse and spent my time there, and that's where I started to doing my interest in sports really took place.
All right, what was Norristown like back then?
It was a beautiful little town. I look back at it so forth because it's a ghost town today. It was a thriving place, and if I recall correctly, Norristown was the largest borough, we said, in the world. A borough now, where you have to go and look borough up. But I let people come back and think with their minds about borough. Like Manhattan in New York is a borough. And therefore, you can compare Norristown. It was the largest borough, they said, in the world. It could have become a city, but I was told that it would be too much taxes. So that's one of the reasons why they remained a borough. But this was my place of birth, and this is a place that I love to, well, talk about and let people know where I was from all over the world.
Right. And as a student athlete, you know, it's amazing for me to sit in front of you and hear about your journey and all your accomplishments. I hear you were in the Olympics in the year of 1956. Can you just explain, you know, your thoughts on entering the Olympics and, you know, what things you did there?
Well, I had to, first of all, it's about how you got there, because I was like any other kid growing up. I was interested in sports, because on Walnut Street we had Old Holy Savior School was right there on the corner of Marshall and on Walnut across the street from us. And we learned our skills there. We knew that we had no inkling about who was going to be whom. You know, we just had a lot of fun, and if we got a baseball, we beat it to death until it became like a golf ball. The cover was gone, and what you had when it was a golf ball, we taped it up and beat it to death some more with a stick. if we didn't have a bat. And we played marbles on a sidewalk because there was no pavement next to the school. And therefore we had skills about many things, and they don't do those things anymore. They don't shoot marbles. Right. And they don't have other things that we used to do. We used to form a group. Tommy Lasorda and his youngest brother we call Smokey. There were 5 brothers, by the way, he had, and I had one. We go down to Main Street and DeKalb Street, and they had a supermarket there, and then up at Marshall and DeKalb was a fish market. We knew, and the Acme was next to it, so we go and we ask people. Now Tommy and my brother would be like the overseers, and we would have to ask people, would you like to take your order? That meant that they came out with their bags, and we would carry their bags, or we made a wagon that we put together, and the brothers were like supervisors and tell us to carry them. Smokey and myself and Tommy and my brother were the guys that would follow behind us and then tell us how much it cost them, if it were 10 cents or a nickel or a quarter to carry their groceries, you know, to their homes. Mm-hmm. And we never knew what kind of money we made, but that was what they were about, big brothers in those days. But you had to do something constructive. If you couldn't find something to do that was worthwhile. In the meantime, we had a lot of sports we were doing. Baseball, we'd do that. We'd take that stick, and not a bat, a stick, and right. We had a basket that we used for put on a pole, a telephone pole, and we used a little tennis ball, and we developed skills this way. We were doing something constantly outside of school, or we tried to find something to keep us occupied. Mm-hmm. Growing up in Norristown, there were a lot of things. We had a field called Blue Mill Field. Right. It was an area that they took, which is now, it was a big field because it didn't have any homes at the time, but you would never know what the end of where Basin Street would run into the dead end at that time, High Street, I believe it was called, and it was at the corner of Violet and Basin Street. There was a field, mm-hmm. and there we played baseball. Mm-hmm. And it was wonderful growing up in not having those sports at the time, but in school we had sports that mm-hmm. From Rittenhouse. Then we began to do what we thought we wanted to do. Right.
Who was your biggest inspiration throughout your career of being an athlete?
There were a lot of them. Just like any other child growing up, we watched sports and we always wanted to emulate people. We had a hero like in any sport, because when I was growing up, we used the word colored guys, if they were selected for something, it was a big thing, because we're being a minority, but it was the way with Tommy and them, like their father and so forth were born in Sicily, and they came to America, and it was a new thing for him as well. We knew what it was like and so forth, being a part of, say, a minority, but we made a difference because of the way we grew up, because we only knew what we had a thing that in the neighborhood, you didn't come there and into our territory and act like a fool, mm-hmm. And therefore, like, we didn't get into any fights like that. Right. And what we had, though, they had a club called LAM, Lodge Antonio Medici. I think that's correct. And it was down on Main Street, and it was right next to the Main and Art Street, actually. It was one door in from that on Main. But there is where we learned the skills for boxing. And I was a boxer, my brother was a boxer, Tommy tried to box, and those was the outset for that. But we only had, in elementary school, we only had a field day. Mm-hmm. And that was once a year. And we all would go to Roosevelt Field, which was a big thing for the elementary schools, because we had quite a few of them in Norristown at that time.
Right.
So as we venture here, we can get into that. That field day, we didn't know what we were doing. We just ran a relay, and that was the size of it until you got into junior high school.
Right, and you know, I've heard you talk about, you know, boxing and playing baseball. What encouraged you to run track?
Well, that's a good question, because most of the time, if we got into any kind of trouble and doing something that we shouldn't be doing, we ran. You ran away from the problem, not to it. But the thing is, we were very mischievous, like most of the kids. The Iceman come by and so forth, and he takes the ice with his big clippers there and so forth, and take it in the house. We got all the free ice we wanted by chipping away, you know, when he had a truck they had. Those, you wouldn't even imagine what it was to have ice in the summertime when it was hot.
Right.
And you had an ice box in they're not a freezer, not a refrigerator, you had an ice box. And to have that ice put in there and so forth, once the guy goes to take your ice to the house, we always had the chips that were there, because we were mischievous and did some things, but it was growing up, and that's what we did there. We didn't have any organized sports.
Right.
And so we had to do something, so we shot marbles. It was a great game that we had across the street, and boy, we had a lot of fun doing that.
Right. And you know, I read that you went to college. Did you run track in college as well?
Yes, I ran college. I ran before that. I started at Rittenhouse. Now, we had that field day that we had in grammar school. That was the only time we were exposed to running, that one day at Roosevelt Field. And it normally was a relay. But it started at Rittenhouse, and that's where everything had begun, because it was organized sports. And we had two junior high schools, Stewart and Rittenhouse. I lived on this side of the road, so it was Rittenhouse. And it was just wonderful, because it played a major role in the development of a lot of us, myself, because it put me in a situation that I would learn about more people and then have a greater interest to go to college.
Right. And what did you major in when you went to college?
I majored in political science, and I have a degree in political science, and I have a master's in education. But I went to Morgan State in Baltimore, and it was strange how I got to the college, because I thought I didn't want to see my father, who worked at Allenwood Steel Company for 38 years. I didn't want to see him work, and I was the youngest of 5 children. Right. And I had 3 sisters and 1 brother, so I didn't want mother to be working like she did, or my father. So I said if I didn't get a scholarship, I wasn't going to be going to school. But I found out I had a talent, then it was running, and I found out that you can go to school free if my grades were there. So I happened to be an honor student, so that helped a great deal. And but Rittenhouse is where it had begun, with a great man by the name of Mr. Vincent Farina. And after the WW2, he watched me, and I was a very mischievous individual, but he saw something in me that a lot of people didn't see, that I had some type of ability, and he tried to encourage me, and he did. And he was my track coach for a while, and then we had a Mr. Abraham Berger, who taught geography, who lived across the street from Rittenhouse, who also was a track coach. But Mr. Farina was the one that inspired me to continue to run and to study. And I was very fortunate. I was a good student, and I taught myself how to run hurdles, but that all began because of a guy named Clarence Smith. He's gone now, but he was one of the greatest athletes that came out of Norristown High School, and that was Jimmy Smith, the organist's young brother. And we were very, very close, and I wanted him to go to college, but he had other things he wanted to do, and so I pursued my efforts. I did not want my parents to work to get me, to pay for me to go to school, so I had a talent. So I said, if I run fast enough, I can get a scholarship, and I had several. So, and thus for the reason, after Rittenhouse, I had done one of districts and everything. I taught myself how to run the hurdles, but I could do a lot of other things. I was a pole vaulter, a long jumper.
Right. And, you know, I hear you talk about your siblings. Were you the only child that ran track?
Yes. My, being the youngest, I had a sister, I had 3 sisters and 1 brother. My brother was a standout boxer. He went to the Golden Gloves. He got that far, but he was quite a boxer. And then after he left school, he went and joined the Navy and caught a portion of the Second World War was ending. But my sisters, 2 of them went to college, and they became dental hygienists. And all 3 of my sisters married to dentists, all 3. And that was something else. But I went on to, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, but other things came in there, and that was my education was first. And I can talk about where Morgan State offered me a scholarship, and I accepted, and that's where I became who I am today, I believe, because I had a great inspirational coach by the name of Eddie P. Hurt.
Right.
And go ahead, I will talk about that. If you want to know about what happened in Morgan, we can go that way.
Yep, you can talk about that.
Well, Morgan State was enrollment. If we had 1,000 students there at that time, we were lucky when I first went.
That was a small school.
Yeah, small then, but they have since grown a great deal from that time. My coach was an extraordinary man. His name was Coach Eddie P. Hurt. He was a very tiny man. He weighed maybe about 100 pounds, 150 pounds would be too much for him. But he had coached a lot of guys, and what he did, the history books, he made history. He was a little black school in Baltimore, and we had, I guess, about 800 students or something when I was there, and most of them, I would say, out of the 800 would have been about 700, I guess, would be girls, and because it looked like they outnumbered us quite a bit, and it's grown, and it's a university today. But that's where I started. I got a scholarship, and I failed to tell you, though, but in how I got it, because I won the state championship in the 200-yard low hurdles they had, which they don't have anymore. And my time, I found out, was the 2nd fastest in the country at the time. There was a boy named Baptiste from Texas who ran about 2/10 of a second faster than I did.
Wow, that's close.
But that was my hope, and that's how I got to go to college, was through the hurdles and being a Pennsylvania state champion. And like I said, it was number 2 in the country. And then I went to Morgan State. Yeah.
Wow. And I watched your interview with Rich Perez, and one part that really spoke to me was when you mentioned the word kismet. Now, I Googled that word because I wasn't sure what that word meant, and it said kismet is a power that is believed to control what happens in the future. Now, do you believe that word explains your achievements throughout your life? Yes,
I believe it, because I did a lot of reading, and one of the things I had come across and was I ran in many places, and one of these, this word comes from India, kismet, and it's like fate. Fate. What happens to one? What do you become? You become what you want to if you want to do something. You make up your mind to do it. You have a direction you want to go. You waver from nothing in order to achieve what it is that you have as that goal. And that's what I did, and I believed in kismet. Right. And I learned from later years. I went to India, and I learned more about India, but I was right on the right trail and so forth because I took many things from my learning of people and what have you, and it took me to another stage, to another level. And Kismet was one of them, and that's what I got there, and I was supposed to, if things were going to happen, they're going to happen here, and it did at Morgan State, because from there I became who I am today.
Right. And in your previous interview, you spoke about improvising with pretty much anything, to play sports, such as hanging up the wire on a phone pole like you spoke about before. And today, children in Norristown, they're able to be more involved in organizations such as ENGAA, Norristown Little League. And how do you feel about organizations such as these?
These are things which are destinies for people, because these kids don't know what they want to do until they are exposed to things. If you have the sports that are there, you have a choice, and you're having a choice to do what you want, providing that you can do it well enough, and you took those skills that you had and you can make them work for you by going to college free.
Right.
And therefore you find out that hey, you go to camps now that they had that we didn't have when we were children, and they're specialized in sports, and it's an investment. Well, we invest in ourselves. I didn't want to see my mother or father work like that, being the youngest, to pay for me to go to college. So I said, I have to do something, and I did. I said, if I can run that fast, I can get a free education, and therefore I took it upon myself to run, train, and to become focused on learning.
And how do you feel about Norristown today? The community, how much has changed for you, growing up here?
I don't even know my town anymore.
Wow.
I don't know it because it's a ghost town downtown. It's I knew where every store was, and we had like 4 theaters like they had on the Arch and Main Street, between DeKalb and that was the Towers, and you had the Grand between DeKalb and Swede. You had the Norris between Cherry and Barbados, and then the last one was the Garrick, which was down there almost right near Markley Street. 4 theaters within about 5 to 6 blocks, and then if you went up the railroad tracks on the other side, there was another one. It was called Westmar. 5 theaters.
Wow.
Now there are none.
Yep, just like that.
Just like that. That's a ghost town.
Do you have anything to say, any kind of advice for, student athletes in Norristown today?
Yes. There's a thing called education. You never want to get away from there. You want to keep, that was one of the things that I was able to do. I came back to where I was born, and Mr. Vincent Farina saw in me, he saw me as a student when he came from WW2, and he saw me when I was getting ready to go to college. He taught me a lot. And when I graduated, he asked me if when I came back to see him and to thank him for helping me and to guide me and to give me encouragement. That's what kind of teacher he was. He became the principal. And then he went to Methacton and started Methacton School District as a superintendent. But that man inspired me to become whom I came today.
And did you share this advice with your own children? Did any of them pursue any sports, any, clubs or anything growing up?
Well, I had a son who became known as a cyclist. He did it because he wanted to do it. Him and a buddy flew to California, and they rode their bicycles from L.A. back to Delaware. And he was just one of them, and that was with the Lansdale Cycling Club. My other son, well, he went on to try and follow in my footpaths. He's my youngest. He became a hurdler. And of course, I moved, and I was in Wissahickon, and he went to Wissahickon High School, and he ran on a state championship team, indoor, outdoor, and he ran the hurdles. So he followed in my footpaths, and he got a scholarship and went to college, and he also was inducted into a Hall of Fame with his college out in California.
Wow.
And I was put in, by the way, I didn't mention, but I was put into the Hall of Fame by Morgan State, and also I received a lot of things here thanks to Ernie Hadrick, that who I had the pleasure of trying to coach and everything else, and Ernie had a lot of potential, and that is a satisfying thing there, and that would lead to him trying to go to college the same way that I did through sports.
Right.
But yes, I had a son who went on, and we were honored at the greatest sports festival in the world, Penn Relays. And that's another story in itself, because we just finished, and that is one of the greatest relays in the world.
Right. And what do you think is one of your proudest achievements?
Well, there are several, but the thing is, like, each step has to be touched and climbed. High school was a state champion. In college, it was winning an American title. Before that, everything started when you get to the Penn Relays, because it is the largest and oldest relay carnival in the world.
Wow.
And here, that close from home, I started right there running the 4 40-yard hurdles, because I didn't even know what it was like. And I was a freshman when I got third the first time I ran them, and 3 years after that, I won them. And there are only 3 of us in the history of the relays to win them 3 times in a row. And there's a guy named Beatty, and 1931, 2 and 3, and Charlie Moore from Cornell. And I came up, and I am still, there are 3 of us that have done that. And that is well, I love being one of the accomplishments, but each step that I got was a step further, and I just didn't know how high I was up until I did it. I became the American champion 3 years in a row, and then I became the Pan American Games champion in Mexico City. I trained without having to be acclimated to a high climate. The guys who went there for the games and so forth in later years found out that going there was no picnic, because they had to be acclimated. I went, and I was one of the first ones to run 400-meter hurdles. I won. I had not run the hurdles in a year, but I was American champion 3 times, Pan American Games champion in Mexico and once, and then the second one was in Chicago, the Pan Am Games, and I defended my title. But that was a journey in itself, because of a high altitude, and the games being held there in '68 found that it did a great deal of, harm to a lot of people, but we learned a lot more from high altitude versus that rare air and distances. It took its toll.
That's amazing. And just going back, to the Olympics, what are some of the achievements? Did you get any medals, any of that?
I got a bronze medal, which I cherish as a goal, because when you made it to the Olympic Games, there is no other task that you want to go to. There isn't anything else higher than making it to the Games, because you are representing your country. I was representing my country just like I was representing where I was born, Norristown High School, Morgan State. It was a college and then a university, and each time it was another stepping stone. And so you couldn't go any higher than making the Olympic Games, because it was worldwide. It was started hundreds of years ago in Athens, Greece. I ran in the place where the Olympic Games had begun. I set a record there on that track, which I didn't think could be done, because it was not an oval track in Athens. But when I went there, there's a feeling that you had of thousands of years ago that this took place, 600 BC. And here they had these athletes coming. So I competed there, and I felt that this was the epitome of track and field, because this is what they had done in this particular place, Athens, Greece, the birthplace of the Olympic Games. And it didn't get any better than that. And I was 3 times American champion, 2 times Pan American champions, and then Penn relays 3 times, and there are only 3 of us who has ever done that feat in the world. Right. But these are the things that I just cherish, because I came from a little place, a little borough called Norristown, Pennsylvania.
Nice. And, you know, what was your life like after the Olympics? You know, what was the success like?
Well, you call it success, it still was work had to be done. I was too old to run. So I ended up being the first black school teacher in secondary schools in Norristown. That was an achievement. I like being first doing a lot of things, but I paid the price for it. But I thought it was great because, again, Mr. Vincent Farina, my history teacher, who had been wounded during WW2, had suggested that. He said, you have a college degree. Now, I had a political science degree. I didn't have any teaching degree. He said, now, take the test, go down to Temple University, and they have a program that we're going to institute here starting this year. And it was called ITPCG program, which meant intern teaching program for college graduates.
Right.
So I was in the first class at Temple University that if I finished this course to work on my master's degree, I would be eligible to teach school. I passed the test. I went to Temple University and I got my master's degree. And last year was the 50th year that I had graduated from Temple University.
Wow.
But that is how I got into teaching, and I earned the right to teach. But I did a lot of things outside. I had a chance to give back and to teach and help other students along the way. And one of them, I'm proud to say, is here, and that was Ernie Hadrick was one of them. I had a lot of guys before him, and I had a lot after them.
Right. And what responsibility do you believe that a student athlete has on their community? Well, to their community.
A student athlete?
Yes, an athlete.
Well, you have the experience of trying to find out how it is to get along with people.
Right.
And when you do that and you have the ability to talk and you have the knowledge of anything that you feel strong about and enjoy, you can give back an awful lot as well as learn, because you're learning all the time. And when you, just through conversation alone, you become inspired that you want to do something that you may have been afraid of, but somehow you have courage to do. I was the shortest hurdler in the world, and every guy I ran against looked down at me. Some of them made some unsavory remarks to me, you know, and said, you know, wow, how did you get the American championship, you know? Right. And then that inspired me even more. Well, the same thing happened to you. I'm just saying that as an example, because there's so many things that can take you off the wrong track so easily. Right. Stay focused and believe in your dreams and your hopes and your aspirations.
Right. Well, why don't you just talk about, you know, some of your life after, you know, your track was over with, and, you know, you're starting a family and stuff like that.
Well, there's a lot to it. You're busy so much, doing so many things. I had the pleasure when I ran, for each time when I was teaching school, I also was still running, and I could still contribute in everything else. And it was wonderful. I was the first black teacher in the school where my eldest sister and everyone else, the other 4, had gone, and here that was a great honor. And here teaching was a great profession, and a lot of people just had to understand how you do it and where it came from, because in order to appreciate it. And like my father never went to school. He was the eldest boy of 11 children. And he learned how to read and write from his brother and sisters. And he stole my mother. That's called elopement. So she had gone to 7th grade. But here, in those days, it could be done. But they were both sticklers on going to school. And therefore, I had most of the family went to college and graduated. And then we had to try to utilize inspiring of others to do so, our own children and other things as well. But this is a long, outdrawn thing in a way, but I took my talents from everything that I had learned from my teachers, and I still use them to reach out to others. And today I still am involved in many things as an advisor to the USA track and field. I joined a fraternity, and I don't know why I did some things, because it took me off the track of what I still am interested in. I came back home and seeing guys like Ernie Hadrick and seeing the interest that was there, it rubbed off, because he also has tried to do the things that I tried to instill in him and many others. Right.
And can you just explain your coaching experience at Central State University?
Central State, I had done so many things. I had taught school, I had gone to school, I had worked for industry, private, for a steel company in personnel. I worked for some years where my father had spent 38 years. I was first black in personnel there. But there was a first in everything that you were doing, and you said by example. So I enjoyed it, and I did a lot of things, but there are other things that I was interested in. And like I said, I love teaching school, and I love being with the kids, and I love being a track coach, and I could teach them what I did not have. They had better facilities and everything else, and now I don't regret anything that I have done in my life. I enjoyed it because it led to another stepping stone, and I had a chance to deal with young people, and I love working with young people. And as I went to Central State, I had done a lot of things prior to that time. I had traveled, when I won the American Championship, it led me going to Europe and competing against their champions. And I defeated every champion that I ran against, and I was very fortunate. And I was undefeated until the Olympic trials. And then that led me going to Melbourne, Australia for the Olympic Games in 1956. I almost didn't make that team, by the way, because it was a very freak incident. I had graduated from Morgan in 1955, and I was accepted at law school at the University of Colorado in Boulder. And I had run there, and I had won my American title there. And I had a sister who was leading TV commentator out of Denver at that time. And of course, she was just delighted to know I was going to go to law school there. I'd be closer to her, because she felt better that we hadn't seen each other for a while. But then I had to drop out of law school because we have a strict ruling in how to make the United States Olympic team. And it's open. Because I had been the American champion 3 years in a row does not put you on an Olympic team like it may have done maybe in 1900, say, but or 1904. Here you had to earn that right. And our system in the United States is the hardest system for, say, making a U.S. Olympic team. What you had to do was, first of all, that year you had to run a qualifying time in order to try to get to that Olympic trials. And if you were out of school, you ran for a club. If you were out of a club and you were with the armed forces, you had a process of elimination. That means that the Army had to have a process of elimination with all their guys. If you're in Europe, Asia, Africa, and you were good enough, they flew you back to the United States. And here you would have a process of elimination against your fellow the guys in the Army who were based here in the United States, and you came from different parts of the world. And this is how big it is. And then it was a process of elimination. From there, when you got to what we call a process of elimination, and then it boils down to the first three for each event. Then you had these three guys had to be selected from the Army, and the same thing happened to the Navy people. But what we had going our way, I was in the Marine Corps. And the Marines, well, I dropped out of law school, I enlisted in the Marine Corps, and why I did it at that time was a big mistake, because I went to boot camp at Parris Island. Parris Island was known as one of the training centers that makes Marines, boot camp. You had two of them. One was at California, and if you went in California, it was like we call you a Hollywood Marine. But if you went to Parris Island, which was swamp and and a lot of mosquitoes and everything else, it was you had to be a real Marine, went to Parris Island.
Right.
And if you went, like I said, if you want to be a Hollywood Marine, you go to California. But I was in the Marine Corps, and I was America's hope, and we had the Cold War between Russia, who's the greatest. And I was the hope for the 400-meter hurdlers, and here I was in boot camp, and I had 6 weeks only, and I had not run since I had won the championship in 1955, and I went to law school, and I couldn't train too much, and I dropped out of law school. Now I'm in the Marine Corps, and I have not run in 9 months. How can I make it? And believe me, you don't be picked and say that you're the greatest, you are on the team. You earned that right. So I had to run in a process of elimination. When I dropped out of law school, I went back and I said, well, I got to go back home, and I said, I can't do anything right now, so I may as well enlist in the United States Marine Corps, and I did.
Right.
They sent me to Parris Island, and they found out that since I was undefeated and I had been the American champion 3 years, Pan American Games champion, they said, where am I? And they found me in boot camp, and they snatched me out and told me, you're going to Quantico, which is the Marine Corps headquarters, Virginia. And they said, you have 3 to 4 weeks to get in condition to try out for the United States Olympic team. Hard it was, because I had not run since August in competition of 55.
Right.
So in 1956, in June the 19th, 20th, I think it was, the trials, I had a chance. I ran, when I got back to, they put me in Quantico, Virginia, and I had exactly 5 weeks to get back in top shape to run. And then I won the All Marine Corps Championship, and I won the All Service Championship, still a process of elimination of 3 people each time. And then when I got to the Olympic trials, I had some young boys who were waiting for me. One of them was Glenn Davis from Ohio State. The other one was Eddie Southern from Texas High School. And we were in the finals, process of elimination. Well, in order to make that Olympic team, I had to break the world's record, and I also, these 2 guys broke it also, Eddie Southern and Glenn Davis. But we were the ones. Glenn won it, new world's record. Eddie was second, and I was third. That was how we made the Olympic team in process of elimination, not what you had done during the time of all those years of being consistent and being American champion. It was the time that you had to be ready. So I ended up making it. And the three of us, we got back, and the process was that we came back after June. We had to wait and be training because the Olympic Games were held in Melbourne, Australia, and their summer months happened to be in November.
Wow.
So from June, I was still in the Marine Corps, so I could run. And I ran in Europe. I ran against everybody who wanted me, and I was kicking the tail because I had to be ready. That I wanted to make sure when I got ready to go to Melbourne, Australia, that we were going to be ready. We had 3 meets when they assembled the team in California, and we ran in Oregon. We ran in the rest of the other 2 meets. We ran in California, and then we went, and at that time there were no jets flying you. We went by prop from Los Angeles. We stopped into Honolulu, and we stayed there for about 3 days in Hawaii because the planes wouldn't go that far without petrol. So we had to go from there, and we went to the Fiji Islands to refuel, and then to Melbourne, Australia, and finally to the Olympic Games. That's how the journey went, and believe me, when you got there, you knew that you were meeting the best in the world at the Games. And 3 Americans versus, well, the 3 great runners from Russia, everywhere in the world. And we were very fortunate. I was the first one up, and this was on a cinder track, not all weatherized or anything. And it gets dug up and everything like that. The guys who were running, like, it took a little more, I hold back on that one point, but we all qualified in our heats. We were separate. We didn't have to run each other because we had the fastest times in the world. And we did not have to run like as hard with us being seated against each other. But then we had to come to those finals. The 3 of us from America had made the finals. And in the finals were the great Russian, Yuri Litvev. Right. He was favored also be one of the great ones. A guy named Lean from Australia was in it, and a guy named Potgieter from South Africa. And the other 3 were Glenn Davis of America, Eddie Southern of America, and Josh Culbreath. And they put me in the worst lane. Lane 1, which they had run like the 10,000 meters was on there. And that means this was a cinder track which was just dug up because you had all these guys running in the same lane, and that was lane 1. You did not want to be in lane 1, which was a cinder track all chewed up. But I was, and I had to run it because I had been selected to run in lane 1. Well, I ran, and it was not one of my greatest. I had run easy, running 50 point something in times, which was under the Olympic record. But in the finals, I had everything going against me, but I was able to try and stay up and then come up and fight back the last, say, 10 yards. And it was America, 1, 2, 3. Glenn Davis, Eddie Southern, and myself. The first clean sweep of the Olympic Games was won by the hurdlers. We again won the same thing. 110-yard high hurdles was won by America, 1, 2, 3. That was the Olympic Games, and it was quite a run, but it was not my best race. But it got me to become an Olympian and get a medal.
All right, and I've heard that you were able to go to the White House. Can you just explain that experience for me?
Wow, that was quite a thing. But I got there because of Central State University. I was a coach there, and as a result, I had done something that a lot of coaches had not done, but they wished they had. I had won 10 national titles within 8 years. Wait a minute now, 10? Yeah. I won, and they wanted to know, a lot of people, how did you win 10 national titles and so forth that way? Well, my men and women won the indoor national title and we won the outdoor national title. And therefore, I had won those, say, 10 championships within 8 years. And it was one of the biggest things to happen. So as a result, with this, they said, hey, you have to go to the White House to meet the president on that one. So we went to the White House to meet Mr. Clinton, the president of the United States. That's how we got to the White House. And it was an honor.
Thank you so much for speaking with me today, Mr. Culbreath. All right, I'm Devon Morse, and I just got finished interviewing Joshua Culbreath,